China's automobile industry is imploding, driving them to dump billions worth of vehicles with price cuts up to 34%. Zero Hedge calls it a nuclear price war that could wipe out car makers around the world, especially in Europe. The news comes from the Wall Street Journal, with ground zero being Chinese electric vehicle makers that use billions of cheap government handouts to comically overbuild. To give a sense, at one point there were 500 car makers in China for EVs alone. Roughly 400 have already failed, leaving millions of abandoned EVs littering the Chinese countryside. Bloomberg calls them EV graveyards. According to the Journal, out of the remaining 100-odd Chinese EV companies, just 2 are actually making money: BYD, Li Auto, and of course Tesla. The other 98 are burning billions of cash to stay afloat. The oversupply is driving even the healthy companies to slash prices, so BYD, which is the biggest car maker in China and number 6 worldwide behind Chrysler, just slashed prices by 34%. Their entry-level Seagull EV now goes for $10,000. So this may actually dramatically understate the cuts. Apparently, Chinese car makers sell so-called zero-mileage used cars, meaning the car is new, it's never been driven, but they pretend it is used so they can slash the price to get rid of it. The chairman of Great Wall Motor, also one of China's biggest, said the industry is going through a, quote, Evergrande moment, referring to a massive Chinese property Ponzi scheme. In other words, China's Lehman moment. The spark is a bevy of Chinese cities ending EV subsidies because China's governments are running out of money. This matters because since Donald Trump's trade war, China has dumped roughly $1 trillion in stimulus to maintain the illusion that everything is fine, and to keep paying the millions of workers who otherwise might riot. Now, these have puffed up the economic data, so China reported 6.4% growth in retail sales in the first month of tariffs, but it turns out, like so much in China, the government bought the data. Now, China doesn't export any cars to the U.S., they're not allowed to by safety regulations, so instead, the dumping is going everywhere else. Reuters recently ran an article about a river of BYD cargo ships dumping cars into Brazil, which is wiping out the domestic car industry. Europe just slapped tariffs up to 38% on Chinese EVs to protect their producers, driving Trump-hating EU President von der Leyen to admit, quote, Donald is right on China dumping. She probably needed a stiff one after that. So what's next, brought to you by Unchained.com. China spent decades dumping trillions of cheap money into exporters. This drove systemic overcapacity not just in cars, but in everything from property development, the ghost cities, to consumer goods, to steel, windmills, and solar. Foreign companies cannot compete with free money, and with Trump's trade war now sending thousands of Chinese companies to the bailout line, China is also running out of money. So companies have to dump to stay alive. So the U.S. may not import Chinese EVs or property, but we very much import windmills and solar panels. At least half of windmill components are imported, and up to 90% of solar panels, overwhelmingly from Chinese companies, meaning we are headed for our own Lehman moment on the roughly $500 billion our own government dumped into so-called green energy, 1,000 cylinders, courtesy of the hilarious named Inflation Reduction Act grant factory. When governments give free money to companies, it always leads to waste, corruption, and bankruptcy. China is finding that out, and we are not far behind. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.